Welcome to the FarmBits podcast.
FarmBits is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBits podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with experts, producers, and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to the first episode of the spring 2024 season of the FarmBits podcast. I'm Katie Bathke.
And I'm Emily Hanson, and we're glad to have you with us as we begin our discussion on agriculture for space with Dr. Yufeng Ge from the Biological Systems Engineering Department at UNL.
Could you introduce yourself, sharing your background up until where you are now?
Yes, hi, my name is Yufeng Ge, and I am a professor with the Biological Systems Engineering Department of UNL. And so my training and research is mainly in sensing and instrumentation for agricultural applications and natural resources assessment, primarily soil. So I develop sensors. Examples are imaging sensors that we would take measurements of plants and crops in the field or in the greenhouses and to see if they are short of nitrogen or short of water, and being able to use that information to form decisions for precision agricultural applications, right? And also another part of it is we are using these advanced sensing techniques to generate useful information for the researcher, particularly the plant scientist, basic plant scientist, so that they can utilize that information and include that information in their discovery pipeline to either understand how plants perform under the stress environment at the genetic level and how to use that information to improve the crop from the genetic understanding.
That's awesome. So you talked a little bit about what your research was here at UNL, and the season of FarmBits is kind of breaking into how precision technologies can be used in space and to be space technologies. Can you kind of tell us how you became involved in advancing agricultural research for space?
Yes. So if you think about, a future like space environment, so imagine that we are on the surface of the moon or Mars, okay? And then you think about, we are running tractors in the cornfield in Midwest. So the environment is actually have a lot of similarities in terms of, like the population density and the resources available for the production, like the label, right? So a lot of those are similar, and technologies, things like auto monitoring and automation, robotics is going to be really important for the production here on Earth and also future space agriculture. I'm gonna give you a few examples, right? Hypothetical examples. For example, here now, if you wanted to know whether you got enough fertility in the soil, if plants get enough nutrients from the soil, right? One way you can do is you're gonna go to the field and you can collect samples, and then you send them to the lab for analysis, okay? And then you got the data and oh, the plants are nitrogen deficient or water deficient, right? And then use that and you can form your management decisions and do a fertilization or irrigation events. So now imagine that in the space, you're not gonna be able to go send people to collect the samples, and there will be no lab infrastructure there whatsoever to be able to do the analysis for you, right? So therefore, we will have to, a very high extent, rely on things like, you develop a sensor actually can, maybe automatically tell us, whether the plants are nitrogen deficient or water deficient, and being able to form the decision, and the data can be, and again, imagine that we are on the surface of the moon and Mars, right? Data is going to come back through telemetry to the base here on Earth, and then the researcher can look at them, and then maybe they can form that management feedback somehow through a teleoperation. So that's one example why technology is really important, because everything has to be automated. So the human factor, you have to, almost take that out of the loop, because the human resource is number one, limited resources in the space environment. And, I can give you another example if you wanted to.
Absolutely.
Yes, so labor, right? So in the space environment, think about a future settlement we have. We may have 100 people, or we may have 200 people there. Now, mostly they're gonna be doing scientific exploration. They are going to be really busy in a lot of other more mission critical things, like operating scientific instruments and being able to communicate with the base on the Earth, and many other things. But farming is probably the pretty low in priority in terms of what they wanted to do, right? So therefore, ideally, we would rely on the automation and robotic ways to do the farming for them. So this is very much similar to what we talk a lot these days, in terms of the labor shortage in here for farming, right? And then we'll have to rely on the technologies and automation to do the day-to-day operation of the growing the plants and crops for us.
That's a lot to think about, and being able to come up with automation to be able to do all of that so that you don't have
Yeah.
to send people out be really cool. So can you
Yes.
tell us about the Space 2 program and what kinds of projects are going on currently with this and what kind of projects will be going on?
Yeah, so this is really, so the idea come from, some of the faculties come together, and so we think that this is really the next frontier in science, right? The next things that we wanted to extend the presence of the agriculture and the humans on another planet. So we have a UNL planning grant. It's a 2-year grant that for us to come together and do planning activities, including things like that we do literature search to try to understand what is the current state of the art in the area. Surprisingly, we have found out NASA has think a lot about this, right? So they have done research of crops in space for a long time, several decades already, and they accumulated a lot of the data and experience and the publications. So there's information out there already, but we also trying to engage with other public universities who have already show some interesting records in this area. And we also trying to engage with USDA NIFA, because they are the traditional funding agency of the agricultural research. And the industry play a pretty important role in this area. You probably heard of SpaceX, right? That has a lot of business with NASA about sending the rockets to the space, and they supply the ISS, International Space Station. So that planning grant, we are trying to bring the major players and the stakeholders together so that we understand the landscape in this area. And we find out that, yes, so there's a lot of research already done in agriculture in space, but there's so many unknowns, right? So that's where, I think that UNL can really play a significant role in this space, because, we are an agricultural institution, and we're leading a lot of the research effort and education effort in agriculture. And we are agricultural states, right? It's corn and soybean are our thing. So therefore, it is a very natural fit for the UNL to lead the space agriculture initiative around the nation. So and that's sort of the reason why we wanted to pursue Space 2. Now our next efforts is really to trying to land on a bigger grant, right? So that we can actually do the research program and the education and the extension program.
That's awesome. I love that you kind of bring up Nebraska's involvement as well as UNL's, especially because we are such an agricultural state and it's a very far out futuristic view and kind of how to advance science. I think that was a really cool perspective. So, can we talk a little bit about where you see some of the most important technologies coming into play for getting this research program going and kind of where you see it needs to be?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I can give you maybe two examples.
Perfect.
One is the greenhouse technology. Okay, so on Earth, that we use greenhouses to essentially a lot of interest is locally grown food, right? And then urban farming, vertical farming, it's really big. That would get the productivity high, and you are not really limited to the summer season. You can grow it all year around, and also you can reduce the transportation cost for the food to get to the people, right? Who needs it. So now in space again, think about the surface of the moon and the Mars, and the environment is really harsh. So the harshest environment you can even imagine, right? So the temperature is really low with a big variation, and there is it's not enough atmospheric pressure, okay? And then, so there are carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere. That's great for the plants, but there is no nitrogen, okay? So there's very low nitrogen, and like the water vapor, it's pretty low. So soils are toxic. So therefore, there is no way that you can grow plants like here on Earth that you exposed to the external environment, right? So you have to protect it. So that brings us to, the building of the structure, the greenhouse structure for the plants. And then, so with all kinds of challenges, that's worth research. So how can we provide artificial lighting, right? It has to be solar panel. But how can we, set up efficient solar panel stuff? And, we would like to see how can we use the Martian regolith or moon regolith to support. So regolith is a term that we refer to as soil, but they don't have structure. So therefore they are called a regolith. They're more dusty material, right? But essentially they are deprived of organic matter. There's no organic matter in it. There's not enough nutrient. There's high salts and high pH. So therefore, if you drop the seeds in there, it's most likely we'll see a very low emergence rate compared to what we see here with earth soil. So therefore, there's a lot of things that we have to consider in order for us to build an efficient, sturdy greenhouse so that we can start to grow plants, right? And it would be eventually a sort of interdisciplinary approach. Somebody has to think about the energy cost. Somebody has to think about, the efficient use of the water and the nitrogen. Somebody has to think about it like the material science and keep the greenhouse pressurized and all those, okay? So that's the first example. And the second example is that I'm going to talk about irrigation, because irrigation is really important here in Nebraska. And so we, here on Earth, so when we apply the water, what happens is part of the water is going to go down, kind of percolate out of the root zone, right? Part of it is going to be held in the soil matrix. That's the available water that the plant can use across the season. Okay, so and the amount of water that can be held in the soil has a lot to do with the infiltration rate and the particle size distribution, the small pores versus the larger pores, and organic matter content is going to play a role there too, right? So that, and then the gravitation that, kind of pour the water down, that, that's the part of the water that you lost. If you go to the surface of the moon and the Mars, so the gravity is different, actually, okay? So on the Mars, so that's about 37-38% of the gravitation compared to Earth. And on the moon, that's 1/6, so 17%. So therefore, there has been simulation study being done that's actually beneficial to water management if we had a farm on the moon or Mars, right? Because so water can actually stay in the soil longer because the less gravitational pull, okay? But the downside of the regoliths is that they are pretty coarse in the grain size. So therefore, they aren't many small pores. Most of those are larger pores. So if you have larger pores, so the water is easy to flow through the matrix, right? And so therefore, they will tend to stay in the matrix less than on Earth. So you can see those two factors actually playing a contradictory role, right? So it's hard to say which one is going to play a more major role. So, but there again, there are simulation studies saying that if you run a field-based farming on the Mars, so you are going to save the water just because of the less water is going to be percolated. So that's a very interesting point, right? We never think about, because gravity is one factor that has always been with us since the beginning of the evolution, right? And then we cannot change it. But you're gonna when you go to Mars, on the moon, that's gonna be a totally different environment. So but that's gonna be maybe there's someday when we look at how the water management is done on Mars, and it might bring innovative solutions to Earth, right? Because those are a test ground that you cannot do here on Earth. Okay?
That's really cool with, water and everything and how it would move so much differently on
Yeah.
Mars or the moon.
I like your perspective where it's like, I think sometimes we're so focused on what we can learn about Mars, but what can that information show us? I think it's
Right.
a hand-in-hand relationship that I don't think is near enough talked about, and I think that was really cool.
Can we talk a little bit more about some of the adaptations that have been made to grow food sources in potential space environments?
Yeah. So in terms of an adaptation, technology-wise, that NASA, for example, have done quite a bit of work already. There actually isn't any plants ever grow beyond the International Space Station. Okay, so the best that we do, the best we know, is those experiments that are being conducted on the ISS, right? And then if you look at the experiment setup, they are in hydroponics, and they are primarily looking at things like lettuce, the microgreens, right, which can be made of salads. And there are some growth with wheat and rice, I believe. Those provide us with starch, the staple food type of thing. So so people use technologies, and they try to monitor the environment of the growth chamber on the ISS, and trying to basically understand how production in that space environment, particularly the reduced zero gravity actually on ISS, and the improved radiation environment. Because on Earth we have magnetic field that's essentially filtered out most of the harmful radiation, which in the ISS you will have some. But if you in the flight to the Mars, you're gonna have a lot of those. And whether the plants under the prolonged radiation, is that going to change their genetic makeup? Cause because we know that those radiation are carcinogenic for the human, right? For the animals. We don't know. It seems like plants are pretty hardy in terms of that, but there's also evidence that it does kind of alter the some of the genetic makeup of the plants.
And we're just curious, does UNL have any involvement in some of that space of kind of like how to grow the food? What are we looking at?
Yeah, good question. That's what we are the space are trying to make that happen. So if you look at a public universities, the research institutions, right? They do. So NASA usually contract. NASA can't do everything, right? So they usually, if there is a space flight opportunity, right, and then they usually would look for the collaborators. So if there's a particular area that you are doing really good, then NASA is going to find you and invite you to participate in some sort of experiments with them on the ISS or on the some sort of orbiting platform on the Moon and Mars later on. So that's what we are exactly what we are trying to realize in this space 2 framework is we wanted to do research well at the beginning here, and we hope that we can get excellent research ongoing, and we can publish the results, right? And we can get on the radar of NASA. And someday they're gonna come to us and say, "Oh, we know that you guys are doing, outstanding, for example, water management research in Nebraska, right? And we have this water management challenge on the ISS, and we want you to be part of it and provide solutions to the problem we have." So that is really our vision. So, but we have to kind of have experience and get a lot of research ongoing first.
Absolutely. Okay, I was wondering kind of how that worked and kind of where UNL was at in that movement. Another thing I noticed is logistically, when we anticipate having all of these essentials for growing food, we talk about the soil, we talk about water, we talk about nutrients and lighting conditions, temperature, all of that. Can you explain to us a little bit of how you're anticipating technology to help with the connectivity of all that? Especially on Earth, we're very fortunate that we have the soil, we have the water, we have this, and it's all across the landscape. Whereas space, it would really be more in one environment and kind of a very controlled environment.
Yes, so you are absolutely right. So, that's it really is very, very challenging, and it takes a sort of a systematic point of view, right? So somebody, at the very top has to have come up with sort of like a grand design, what this is gonna look like. But then, if you look at, you break that up into subsystems, then we have to talk, we have to think about air, right? We have to think about water. We have to think about the soil. We have to think about the plant adaptation, the genetic makeup of the plants. And we have to think about management and technology, a lot of the precision agricultural technologies, monitoring, automation, and robotics, and data science and AI these days is going to play a really key role in all these as well. Now, on the top of it, you have to think about like the energy budget of the system, right? Every time that you add electronics to the system, right, you take some energy out of that system. So therefore, that's really a system of systems design, and it's scientists from many different disciplines has to come together and sort of to design what does it look like.
Awesome. Yeah, a very systematic approach. I think that's a very key aspect. It's just things you don't have to think about on an Earth atmosphere. Like we don't have to worry about air and
Correct. Yes, that is because plants has been here for millions of years, right? So the evolutionarily they are adapted to this environment already.
Yeah.
And as they develop the mechanism already, that's a common threats they're gonna have, right? It's already built up in their genetic mechanism. But when you get to a completely different environment, then they have to do, maybe there will be opportunities, right? They will adapt and they will be able to come up with new ways to deal with that not so friendly environment. However, though, we can't wait for millions of years for them to evolve again, right? Makes sense?
Yes.
So therefore, that's the reason why technology really is going to play an important role here is gene editing, for example, right? And then transformation, so that we can help to accelerate that type of plant adaptation to a different environment, to a different soil.
That's such a great point to bring up too, as well as we've spent so many years studying things from the Earth's perspective, and now we're at a time where technology is such a key role, especially in agriculture, and we're really working towards that. So it seems like a really unique opportunity for like two very different systems to kind of collide here.
Yeah, absolutely. The other part of our team really is, one of the great idea that always in the back of our mind is, we try to, move to the space, but, we also trying to address climate change. If climate change happens really quickly, in the framework of not thousands of years, not 100 years, but in decades.
Yeah.
Right. Can we respond fast enough? Can agriculture transform fast enough to adapt to it? That's number one. But the second is, can agriculture play a role to mitigate that, right? To counteract that effects. So, so that therefore, I think space really provide a good test bed for us to, discover those good technologies, the technologies that it's kind of not easy to come up with on the Earth environment, so that we can kind of bring those back and then actually address the climate change problem, right? Because, coldness, very hot environment, and huge variation of the temperature and the extreme weather events. We have seen all those already, right? But we only have decades to address those problems. We can't wait for hundreds of years or the millennium to do that. And I think that's the beauty of some of the get this to the space and to see what agriculture would look like in those environments, and that would bring a lot of insights back to the Earth to address climate change.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that. Yeah, I guess seeing how you could get something to react in space, if it works out well, adapt it to work here on Earth.
Yeah.
To help mitigate some of that. What do you think will be one of the biggest challenges moving forward with agriculture in space?
Well, that's hard to say, like from my perspective, I'm an engineer, right? So therefore, I kind of naturally tend to looking at these technologies, right? So therefore, I will say, develop that plant-based life support system for the early settlers and astronauts would be, absolutely the number one technology we have to develop. So, you have to think about it is really resource intent. It's very resource restricted, and it is sort of you have to almost develop a system that's so efficient, such that you are not losing anything, right? Everything can be circulated, everything can be reused, but you are at a very restricted area, space, right? So I think that's really challenging to do. Keep in mind, we are not gonna bring animals with us yet. There's someday we would like to see, right? So bring pets with us. Right now there's no discussion on the pets yet. So plants only. So I'm also thinking about the technology, right? We have to bring all the technology with us, right? Robotic assistance, AI sort of powered, what is it like? It's not a chatbot, but you can ask AI questions, right? You have a problem, like why can't I address it? And ask the AI. Hopefully, I can provide assistance and answers for that emergent situation. Those kind of things. I think. Yeah, so there's not really one technology that's outstanding, one thing that's outstanding, but it's all of them are important, and all of them has to be advanced to a certain extent so that all these are possible.
That's excellent. That's an excellent point, as well as there's not one important thing. It really is going to be a whole system, and it's got to be such an efficient system that it's going to go, and you have confidence that it's going to work because it has to.
And to be able to run on its own.
You can bring some food with you, right? And in the hope that in 2 or 3 years, they are going to be stable and not go bad, right? But we also know that things like vitamin in the food, they are easy to degrade, right? So therefore, and there has been always concerns about, well, we do need to, and that's the reason why we need to grow like things like microgreens, like lettuce along the way, tomatoes, and just to provide those supplemental nutrients that the human needs to function.
Absolutely. Excellent point as well. What are you most looking forward to in the future of research with agriculture in space?
Yeah, well, to me, it's gonna be the technology, right? Yeah. So I'm an instrumentation and a sensing person. I'm doing some research in robotics and automation as well, right? So what really excites me is that let's say someday we have most of the technology ready already to get us to establish a settlement on the surface of Mars, right? Now, before the first settler ever reach the surface there, we should already have robotic operation of the plant growing started before they go, right? So that when they reach that point on the settlement, they can already harvest the first crop and starts to not worrying about oh, shoot, I don't have things to eat yet, right? Now, how to make that happen? Well, so we need to, way before the first settler come, we have to have cargoes of the robots, sensors, and everything go there first, right? And they are sort of self-deploying, and the robots can, take the seeds out and then, put them on the ground, and it starts to grow. And then we have sensors established, and we can see how the crop grow on the surface already. And then those images or those data is going to be telemetry to the earth, and we look at them, right? And we say, oh, they are growing, or oh, no, they're not really emerging. We have to regrow and all those things, right? Or they're going to show the deficiency, or there's a potential crop failure, and then, we need to replant, those kind of things. But it's all, happening on another planet. But the communication makes it possible, and you can actually see it. And then you can, operate the robots just like we operate here, but it's a teleoperation, right? Some plants needs to have a care. If you need to, apply some nitrogen, and you can operate the the robots or drones to do that for you, right? And then, after the operation of 90 days, typical corn growing season, right? And then, you say, okay, it's ready, but at the same time, you have rockets ready to send the people there, right? And by the time they are landing, crops are mature, ready to harvest, ready to be consumed. So that really excites me.
That's awesome. I love that. I like the autonomous part. I like the robotic part, and I like the very systematic vision of it. That's really cool.
If our listeners wanted to learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they find that information?
Yeah, so we do have a website through, the UNL BSc department. So that's a space too. So we put a lot of information out there. But, we also hope that we'll be able to, do research and put out publications, right? So that's so that, and popular articles, the audience can start to see what our progress are.
That's awesome. And then is there anything we didn't talk about today that you might want to add or share with our listeners?
I think this is just so exciting to all of us. And, if you think carefully, right, it is tremendously challenging. But I do think that, there's a lot of technology advancement already here on Earth that, we're going to further develop. And, along the way, we'll have new technologies. We'll have new varieties come out that would, I truly believe that's in the next 30 to 40 years, I do believe that's possible that we are able to have the first acre of corn or soybean on the surface of the moon or Mars by University of Nebraska Lincoln. Okay. So, for our audience in Nebraska, right? So, I would put out an invite that for any now young kids, okay, 9-year or 10-year-old, 35 or 40 years later, would you like to plant a corn on Mars? Okay. Maybe go there by yourself or teleoperate it here from your home.
That's so fun.
So we have a tradition here on the FarmBits podcast, and it's to ask our guests for a piece of advice. So what advice would you give to anyone who's interested in the future of agriculture and space?
Yeah, well, so get engaged. I think it's all the basis for that is going to happen here on Earth, right? So before any technologies, we touch about it, right? So reliability and robustness is probably the number one thing. If we have to put in a safety factor for anything that's flown in space, it's going to be a safety factor of 10, right? So therefore, I think there's a lot of engagement opportunities here. We're probably gonna build a ground analog facility here, so that it somehow mimics the space environment, and that would also provide a test ground for some of the technologies that we will build, right? So those are come along the way. We hope that we can get research funding to do some of those work, and audience, so please stay tuned, right? And then, if you see some sort of like simulated Martian crop production base here somewhere in Nebraska, don't be surprised, that's us.
Thank you very much to Dr. Yufeng Ge for taking the time to join this episode of the FarmBits podcast. It's really exciting to hear his perspective and initiative for advancing the agricultural sciences for the space environment. One of my favorite parts of this episode is the interdisciplinary systems that are currently in the works to advance the agricultural sciences for growing food in space.
I agree. And my favorite part of this episode was how technology will play a role in combating the extreme environments in space. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and we look forward to sharing another digital ag story with you next week on FarmBits.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the review sections of your favorite podcast platforms. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.